Hello and welcome to Iconic Duos, the next chapter, Writers and Mentors. To begin, we acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands we're recording this event from, the Wurundjeri and Boonwurrung people of the Kulin Nations. We pay respect to their elders, past and present, and acknowledge their ongoing and millennia-long storytelling traditions. We also pay respects to the elders of all communities and lands that this event reaches. My name is Veronica Sullivan. I'm the Programming Manager at the Wheeler Centre. The Wheeler Centre is very proud and very excited to be partnering with Emerging Writers Festival on tonight's event and to be bringing you conversations with three wonderful pairs of mentors and mentees. The mentees are writers who have taken part in the Next Chapter program run by the Wheeler Centre and supported by the ESOP Foundation. And their mentors are an incredible group of established and wise and generous and funny and talented and clever people in their own right who have shared their wisdom and their writing experience with these emerging writers. Each year, the Next Chapter selects 10 outstanding emerging writers. They receive $15,000 prize money each and a 12-month mentorship with an established writer. They're also offered professional development support and connected with peers and industry professionals and steered through their writing journey. Entries are now open for the 2020 Next Chapter Writers Scheme until the 10th of August. And we strongly encourage any emerging writers watching this who are thinking about applying, please do. You have absolutely nothing to lose, particularly if you've previously faced barriers or challenges to accessing the publishing industry. This scheme is for you. Now let's get straight into hearing from our writers. Our first mentor-mentee pair is Arnold Zabel and Arthur Balkus. Arnold Zabel is a highly acclaimed novelist, storyteller and human rights advocate. His works include Scraps of Heaven, Violin Lessons, The Fighter, which was shortlisted for a Victorian Premier's Literary Award and a New South Wales Premier's Literary Award, and his most recent work, The Watermill. Arnold lives in Melbourne. This year, Arnold is mentoring current Next Chapter recipient Arthur Balkus. Raised on welfare in a Greek migrant family, Arthur was school captain and dux of his final year. However, in the fourth year of an arts law degree, his life descended into drug addiction and imprisonment. Arthur has been a cabbie, facilitated men's groups, worked with at-risk youth and prisoners, run a church, and featured in the general media. A criminologist, speaker, actor, and father of 2 sons, he currently has 3 books on the go. Especially through the difficult times, writing has been a life-giving source for Arthur. Thank you so much, Arnold Zabel and Arthur Balkus, for joining us today. It's wonderful to have you both here.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
I wanted to start off by asking you, Arthur, to tell us a little bit about the projects that you are working on through the Next Chapter and what you're writing at the moment.
Okay, so I did the first, the first draft of a manuscript called 11 with an 8. It's based on a prison diary that I kept over 5.5 years in prison. And I did the first draft 30 years ago, would you believe? And I've just done the 8th, I think, with Arnold helping me. And I've also got another book, fiction based on sort of true events about a character who gets out of jail, because I've been out of prison a long time. So I'm working on those 2 projects, but primarily the first one.
And what was it that drew you to wanting to work with Arnold as your mentor for both of these projects?
Right. I had a list of potential mentors. I did a little bit of research about them, and Arnold stood out primarily for, well, one reason was his life experience. When I read that he was into social justice, that really resonated with me for obvious reasons, and I've been into that for many, many years. And also the fact that he grew up around the corner from where I grew up in Carlton. When I read those 2 things, I thought, this is the man for me. Yeah.
And Arnold, what about you? When you first read Arthur's work and when the Wheeler Centre approached you and asked you if you'd be interested in mentoring him, what made you decide that you would have time for that and that you wanted to work with him?
Well, look, first of all, I recognise the power of the writing. This was a distinct voice. and it also was writing that was driven by lived experience. And then also I began to recognise other things, that in some ways we come from similar backgrounds. We both come from immigrant families, and we both, even subsequently when we first met, it was quite extraordinary, because it was like meeting an old friend, or there were so many synchronicities. I'd worked in the prison system at a certain point in my life. We even knew people from the prison system in common, and I'd had an experience of prison life in America, an incident that occurred during an anti-Vietnam protest way back in the 70s that landed me in prison. And also, I'd say in general, I guess, he impressed me as a writer who was going to take readers into other worlds, and worlds that are unknown to them, and worlds that they need to know about. So for all these reasons, I said yes.
And when you first met each other and started working together, apart from discovering that lovely synchronicity of having things in common and people in common, did you both bring any particular expectations of what it would look like to work together, and what was the subsequent reality? How has it been? How have you found the process of the mentorship?
As someone who's new to all this, I mean, I love writing, but I've discovered, and through my relationship with Arnold, this is much bigger than simply sitting down and writing something that we call literature, if you like, and you hope to achieve that, but there's so much more. So I came into it wide-eyed and wondering, and I didn't know what to expect, honestly. But as Arnold would tell you in our first meeting, which must have lasted a couple of hours, I don't think we sort of talked about the work. We just talked about life, about experiences, about commonalities, about storytelling, and it just lifted me and gave me, right at that initial stage, a sense of confidence that we could relate. And I'm a little strange in some ways, because with a lot of people I find it a bit difficult. I think I carry the vestiges of that experience with me in so many different ways. But I felt very comfortable with Arnold. He was, I guess you'd call a kindred spirit. And that was really important to me. So right from get-go, it was all good. And then, of course, as time passed and I'd sort of feed him chapters that I'd worked on, he'd comment, we'd meet, we'd talk. And so he started sort of helping me to understand all that other side of writing. And he talked about publishing, and he talked about the process, and he talked about craft, and a couple of words like tone and flow. He kept talking about that. And all that was really, really rewarding for me.
And you've been writing for a long time. You've been working away on your craft for many years.
Yeah.
Had you had much formal instruction or feedback throughout that time previously?
No. A quick story. When I was in prison, they had this thing called the Bridge Writers Competition. I don't know if they still have it. And I kept sort of putting in for the first few years and getting nowhere. And there was this old kind of styled school teacher at Beechworth Prison. And I was talking to him about the story that I was about to submit. He said, "Can I read it?" So he read it, and then he said, "Can I give you some advice?" And I said, "What's that?" And he said, "Well, what did you do before you came to prison?" I said, "I was a law student." He said, "I can tell." He said, "Go back and take all those really big words out that you've put in and use other words." So he was the only other kind of formal tutor, if you like, that I had. And I'm still mindful of the big words because they're kind of embedded in my head, and I have to sort of try and wean myself out of doing that. Whereas when I read Arnold's work, I think, man, this flows. It just flows. How does he do that? With lots of experience.
Well, it's interesting. I think that there's a certain advantage in the fact that you didn't get too much formal tuition, because I think that in some ways, it's worked to your advantage because the writing is raw and fresh. It's what attracted me in the first place, and it's interesting, when we talk about mentorships, I think you've got to be very, very careful as a mentor, not to be in a way non-judgmental, willing to say, well, look, this doesn't quite work for me, or perhaps reconsider this or that. But I think you've got to be very careful, because the most important thing is that elusive thing called voice. And Arthur has a distinct voice. And I think that voice is distinct partly because he went through the experience, immersed himself in that experience, and then it exploded out of him with a sense of great immediacy. And if there's too much interference, some of that is lost, and there's an affinity here also, because I think the deepest connection between us really is the fact that we both began writing out of a kind of desperation. I began writing as a kid because there was so much chaos, so many ghosts in the house, in our immigrant family. My beautiful parents, a bit like Arthur's beautiful parents. However, they were troubled and they were adjusting to a new life. My mother was deeply traumatized by the loss of her family in the Holocaust, and I had to deal with her rage and my father's silences, and so I began to write out of that, and I distinctly remember at about the age of 12 going into my bedroom and just writing, and it exploded out of me, and I discovered the essence of expression. Expression means just getting it out, and this is what I felt when I read a lot of passages in Arthur's work, is that getting it out. And if it would lose that spontaneity and that truth, I think then something would go missing.
And so was that a priority for you coming into working together and being a kind of mentor figure to, before looking at the writing and before kind of getting into the nitty-gritty of giving feedback line by line, to kind of dig into, well, what is your voice and how does that work, and what is the story you need to tell, to kind of look at that big picture first? Is that how you think about it?
I think the first thing was, and it wasn't, I didn't go in there with any specific intention. I'd read the first few chapters and I was knocked out by them, and I think really it was welcome to the community of writers, and welcome to the family in a sense, because you belong. I think this is really important. Arthur belonged, and we were equals, and this is a very important thing, I think, about this relationship. I'm learning as much from Arthur, I think, as he is hopefully receiving from me, and he's taking me into worlds that I knew something about, but the other aspects of that world I didn't know that much about, and so I think that's the heart of it. The heart of it is, by nature, I'm not very judgmental. That's why I wouldn't make a very good, editor, perhaps. But I guess I tend to be more of an encourager rather than a judge of work. And I think that was the basis of our first meeting, and it's permeated through in subsequent meetings. In the time of COVID-19, we've had to adjust, and we speak by phone or a bit by email. But I think it's that equality consciousness, and also that sense of, therefore, the grace of whoever go I. This is very important too.
Can I just follow up on that? At that first meeting, Arnold looked me in the eye and he said, something like, I misunderstood. I thought you were new to this, but you are a writer, brother. He said that. And when he said it, it kind of can't even describe it. Coming from Arnold, it was a really deep, wonderful affirmation. I'd had a lot of people say to me in the past, "Oh, you can write really well," and you're always sort of second guessing. But coming from Arnold, and I could tell he wasn't just being nice, it really blessed me, if I could use that word. It did, in a big way. So my thinking kind of shifted, and I thought, yeah, I'm a writer. Go for it, boy.
And it's very interesting because at that first meeting, we were talking about the bigger picture. None of it is planned. It was just getting together, and but very quickly we were talking about the bigger picture. That is the writing life. Already thinking, well, there could be 2 or 3 books. There are things that you're on a journey as a writer, and I think that's another thing about the mentorship in itself. That is that. These worlds can be intimidating, and right from the beginning, it was you belong here, and I think that sense was there. But look, I have to say that going back to the initial point, it was a conversation about things that fascinated me, and that we were on the same wavelength, I guess.
And you mentioned, Arnold, COVID. Obviously, it's been a difficult year and a challenging year in so many ways. How have you adapted to the circumstances that, the kind of material circumstances that have meant it's hard to meet face to face and those obvious things, but also how has that changed your writing process, Arthur, and how do you think that has distinguished the experience from what it otherwise might have been?
Good question. The only way the writing process for me has really changed, because I haven't been in a proper job for quite a while for a number of reasons. So I have a lot of time to devote to writing, and I always have. COVID didn't change that much because writing's a fairly solitary process. And as some of my ex-prisoner mates have said about the effect of COVID and isolation, so what? We're used to it. And it's true. I could sit in a room for a whole day and just sit there and focus on what I'm doing. As long as I've got something to focus on and I'm in that other kind of world, I'm fine. So that's what I've been doing since the mentorship started and COVID. I've been devoting 8 to 10 hours a day, roughly, each day to writing, which is a lot of writing, but yeah, love doing it. So not seeing Arnold has been a bit of a letdown, because I've really enjoyed the company, and hopefully henceforth we can continue that.
Yeah, we've continued more in terms of receiving chapters and emailing a response. We had a phone conversation or so, but it's meeting face to face is far more productive and exciting in a way, because one thing leads to the next. You spark off in a different kind of a way. But having said this, to be able to sit with the chapters and to read them carefully and respond to them has been also something you can continue doing. And what's been happening really is that I've wanted the next 2 chapters. I think we've done it the right way. Instead of getting that whole manuscript, I'm getting sent a couple at a time, and then I say, look, I want to know, and I really do want to know more. So it's keeping me.
It's like a serialised.
Yeah. It's serialised. I like the process. We stumbled upon it somehow, but it works really well for me. Oh, you're off to Beechworth now. Oh, there's a whole new chapter there, and now it's goodbye Beechworth, and I'm looking forward to seeing where Arthur's headed next. So you can continue, there's no doubt about it.
What do you hope for the remainder of your, official mentorship time together? What will kind of the next steps be? Obviously, they're continuing to send the chapters back and forth, but Arnold, you mentioned some of those other elements of talking about the industry and other things beyond the writing. Is that coming into it as the conversations progress?
Yeah, look, it's very interesting. We had a conversation yesterday, and a writer is affected by the events around them, and the Black Lives Matter issue came up, and also the issue of I've been writing about people that are unjustly imprisoned refugees, asylum seekers in Mitre, in Broadmeadows and the Mantra Hotel. And so these things are coming up in the conversations. And the interesting thing about the Black Lives Matter challenge is that it reawoken me that time I spent in the United States and became immersed in prison literature or literature of black writers who were meeting the challenge of taking people into worlds they didn't even want to know. So Ralph Ellison, in classic Invisible Man. George Jackson, I just remember today, George Jackson, Soledad Brothers, Prison Letters. He wrote that at the time when I spent those few days in the system and was shocked beyond belief. And then James Baldwin, The Fire Next Time, and Richard Wright. And so that's been another thing about the mentorship. I remember when reading the early chapters of Arthur's work, it reminded me a fair bit of Raskolnikov, the character in Crime and Punishment, that Dostoevsky's masterpiece. And so this becomes much more. We can share this, and I can say, "Oh, have a look at this," and maybe you'll see affinities with your world, or maybe it'll trigger other possibilities in the way you see your world.
So being a reading guide and helping find a context for where Arthur's work sits.
Yeah, and there was that extraordinary monologue that's going viral from Q&A from Maine Wyatt, the Indigenous actor, where he was able to get up and in this monologue express the anger. And that sort of rage and anger is present in the prison system, and it's present in Arthur's writings too, and in a way it reinforces what he does and encourages that a sense of that what I'm writing is important, and it's got all kinds of variations that arise in all kinds of circumstances.
In many ways, our mentorship's probably a bit unique in that, I've been reading Arnold's work too. You got me books of his, and the first book I read, Scraps of Heaven, was his childhood. And I cried like a couple of times reading it, because I was reading about events that could have been mine and were mine in a different sort of way. And then at the moment I'm reading Sea of Many Returns, based on the people of Ithaca. And I'm Greek, of course. And I wrote to Arnold the other day and I said, "You're like an honorary Greek and you know more about Greece than most Greeks. And reading your work has helped me to understand my heritage because I was born here. I've been to Greece once, spent 2 days on the island of Lemnos where my parents come from. And I kind of vicariously experienced so much through reading about the people that you described. So that was a really worthwhile thing for me. And going forward, some of the things I want to talk to Arnold about is just his daily process. How do you write? What do you do? Where do you sit? How much time do you spend? Just the technique. What kind of aids and resources do you use? Stuff like that would be helpful. And when we finish this project, if there's still time ahead, I'm hoping to kind of launch a little bit into the next one that I've done, 25,000 words on. So I've done a bit of work on it, because that's sort of fiction, but based on true stories, mine and many, many other people I've known and worked with. And that's a different kind of journey too. The voice is a bit different, if you like, and the perspective. So I'm going to pick Arnold's brain as much as I possibly can on all these different levels.
It sounds like there's mutual picking happening, which is a really nice thing. Well, thank you both so much for your time today and for sharing your experiences together with us, and good luck for the remainder of your mentorship and your time together.
And just finally, thank you again to you and to the Wheeler Centre and to everyone associated with this wonderful, wonderful enterprise, because, it might sound a little bit cliched, but it's changed my bloody life.
Well, maybe to finish up on, Arthur, the scheme is open for entries again now, and to people who are considering entering, what would you say to them?
Oh, look, go for it, because honestly, I'll never forget the day you called me. I was in this busy room and there were people all around. I was working with some ex-prisoners, and you're saying, congratulations, you're one of the Next Chapter Award recipients. And I was thinking, what's that? Because I'd kind of forgotten. Because you apply for different things, you don't expect to win one. And honestly, it took me the better part of the rest of the week to kind of digest it, that it had really happened. So go for it. Don't sell yourself short. Have a go. And if you don't succeed, just keep trying like we all do.
Beautiful. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next mentor-mentee pair is Malaika Gesafetafehi and Alan Van Nieven. Malaika Gesafetafehi is a proud Black, Indigenous, Pacifica and West Asian writer. Their mob is from Murray Mer Island, from the Zagareb and Dwawareb tribes. Malaika is also a literature and film critic. You can find her rambling at Endless Yarning, Radio New Zealand and Nerdy Poc. She loves talking about all things nerdy, as well as decolonising spaces online and in real life. Malaika is a 2019 Next Chapter recipient. This year, Malaika is being mentored by the wonderful Ellen Van Nieven. Ellen is an award-winning writer of Mununjali, Yugambeh and Dutch heritage. They write fiction, poetry, plays and non-fiction. Ellen's first book, Heat and Light, was the recipient of the David and Iapon Award, the Dobby Literary Award and the New South Wales Premier's Literary Awards Indigenous Writing Prize. Ellen's second book, a collection of poetry, Comfort Food, was shortlisted for the New South Wales Premier's Literary Awards and highly commended for the 2016 Wesley Michelle Wright Prize. Throat is Ellen's highly anticipated second poetry collection, out now. Please welcome Malaika and Ellen. Thank you so much, Malaika and Ellen, for joining me today. Malaika, can you tell us a little bit about the project you're working on through the Next Chapter and why you wanted to work with Ellen as your mentor?
I am working on multiple projects, but the two that I'm working with in the Next Chapter, and I feel like I'm going to choose eventually which one I'm going to put all my energy into. One is about the schooling system and how I grew up on mainland Australia. It talks about the differences of my experiences from the Torres Strait, growing up in the little school there and then coming to mainland Australia. It's about my experiences with racism in school. It's about my experiences with teachers assuming racist stereotypes about me. There's so many layers from primary school, high school, and then you have university. I feel like it's more intense as you get older because a lot of people feel like, I think more people are just ignorant and you're surrounded by more people who feel like their ignorance is truth-telling when it isn't. And then the second one, this one is very complex. It's basically about this girl who's the ocean and with the help of the house spirit, the ghost that haunts her house, and Time. So Time is a character within the book, and they both help her find out who murdered her childhood friend. I use poetry and prose, and it's a novel, and there's illustrations too that I've been working on for it, but it's very complex, very different. I don't think anyone's done something similar yet. And so it's harder to be like, I have nothing to follow, nothing to be guided by. But it's very, very unapologetically Black. And the reason why I chose Ellen, Ellen's pretty deadly, eh? it's very hard not to fangirl because I love Ellen's work. I'm a big fan of Ellen's work. Yeah, but me and Ellen have a lovely sibling relationship, and so it's very easy to talk to them. It's very easy to be like, "Yep, I'm gonna do that. Yep, I'm gonna do this." Ellen's been very understanding, and it's just a great person to be mentored by.
And what about you, Ellen? What drew you to working with Malika and working on her writing together and being her mentor?
It just felt really perfect. And Malika, I'd only met you a couple of times, and but just your energy is just so beautiful. And seeing you perform a couple of times at Queensland Poetry Festival, I was like, whoa, this is this real new deadly voice. I could just tell that you were already something special, but I could just tell that we're going to be hearing from you in the years to come, and you're going to be a really important Black voice for future generations as well. So and I really love the idea of your project, how you don't feel confined to form, you're creating your own form. It's something that's really, I love the complexity about it. I love that you're using both prose and poetry, because they're my two genres as well, and I also like to find the in-between space. And I just love how elemental it is. And there was something really about being both being on Yagara and Turrbal country in the same kind of physical place, being able to work with you in person. It was really appealing, because it's so much easier, I think, just to hang out. And we had our first sort of official kind of mentor meeting, kind of just before the COVID pandemic.
Given that it has been such a disrupted year and that it's been such a challenging year in so many ways, and that part of what you were looking forward to with the mentorship was that opportunity to meet face-to-face and to be able to connect in real life, how has your experience been this year so far of the mentorship?
So I think it's very different to what I expected pre-pandemic, which is obviously understandable, because ain't nobody assumed that a pandemic was going to happen. But my expectations had to change because of the pandemic, and because of my priorities, they also changed. So the world just looked different. My world looked different. And I always yarn with Ellen about how it feels like I'm in a constant state of just surviving and trying to just do my best in everything and not worry about anything else. But it's just I'm also very forgetful. I'm very forgetful.
You're too young to be forgetful.
Yeah, I can't help it. My head is always in the clouds.
Nice. Yeah.
I'm forgetful. I'm not disorganized, but because of the pandemic, I feel like everything is just stacking up, and it's you have to finish everything before you can move on. And it's I don't want to finish everything. I want to move on.
Yeah.
But yeah, the relationship is very different because of the pandemic. And I think Ellen has helped in transforming what it would look like now. And it's been very helpful. And so has Tusiapa, my other mentor. But it's just, it's very lovely to know that both my mentors are very understanding. They understand I have a lot of siblings. They understand that I support my family. They understand that I have to keep myself afloat with multiple jobs. But yeah, it's very different. But I'm very grateful and thankful to have very good mentors and to have people who know how to shape this experience, considering we are going through a pandemic.
Mm-hmm. And what about you, Ellen? I mean, you've had a lot of experience of working with emerging writers and young writers in mentorship capacity, but also as an editor. Is this, given everything, has this been a very changed experience for you as well?
It has, yeah. I think there's been a lot of times where I've been working with writers and things have come up that mean they have to shift priorities, and that's been kind of personal stuff and political stuff. But this year, this pandemic is affecting everyone, not just like a family or an individual. So there's been a huge adjustment period for everyone, I think. And it's like so normal to myself to just like go through the motions with that and take some time with that. I am one of those people that feel like we are emerging from this pandemic too quickly. And I think for me, the meaning when this first happened, the meaning was that country wanted us to take some time to reflect on how we're treating country and what we're doing, and for things to slow down and for us all individually to think about our purpose. But yeah, so I was just when everyone started doing that. I think now it's like this kind of rushing to get things up and running again. And I think, yeah, for me personally, it's like stressful. I don't know how other people feel, but I'm like, no, like it's too fast. It's too much of a sudden kind of snap back. And maybe there was more in that time that we could have, had with ourselves, and
more lessons to learn and take from the time and sit with. But no one's taking that time to do that deep thinking and reflection. Definitely. Malika, you mentioned your other mentor, and it's quite an unusual situation that you have in the next chapter. When we first started speaking about what your mentorship needs would be, you were really interested in having a split mentorship and working with two different established writers. And so your other mentor is Tusiata Avia. Can you talk a little bit about what that relationship has been like, and how it may be different, or what the similarities have been, and what you're kind of getting from each relationship that you have?
So basically, we had our very first meeting not that long ago, last month, I think. But basically, she was like, whatever you write, that is writing. And I was like, you know what? You're right. And it was just so affirming to just talk to her, because I was in this space where I was like, I can't write, but when I do write, I don't feel like it's good enough. Like, I feel like it's just words and they're not my words, and I feel like I need to put it away, hide it, and pretend that I didn't write at all. But Tusiata was just like, you write whatever, and that's writing. You can send it to me. And I was like, you know what, I will. And she basically told me to adopt this process of waking up and writing whatever for 30 minutes or an hour. I've been doing it for an hour every morning, and just write whatever I want. And because of that, I've been coming up with so many little short stories since our last meeting, because it's just like I get inspired in the morning. And because Tusiata also talked about how the way that we think is very different to how other people think, like Indigenous people, the way that we storytell is very different to how non-Indigenous people storytell. Like ours is very ingrained in something higher than us. Like it's coming from a place that's not like us. It's coming from the land, it's coming from the sea, it's coming from the sky, it's coming from our ancestors. It's this whole scope which we tap into, and it's very, very different to how other people storytell, which is what I found very useful, very affirming, because for me, I think that's why my words didn't feel recognizable, because it was like, I'm not really tapping into anything right now. I feel like I'm just writing for the purpose of writing. And for me, that was never my goal or passion or how I wrote in the first place. It was always like, wow, this is inspiration. Let me turn it into words. And Tusiata really shaped how I did that. And I'm still doing that, and I really find it helpful. But yeah, I just really appreciate it.
And I feel like maybe you had that knowledge already that you knew you needed a Black mentor from the outset, right? That's something that you were very clear on from the start, was that you wanted to work with somebody who had that same sensibility and would understand your writing, and that you would understand their writing as well. Yeah. So that was always really cool.
Yeah, like I always wanted someone Black to mentor me, because it was like, one, the stuff that I'm writing about is very unapologetically Black. Like no one else will understand the complexities or the emotions that I feel. Like if you even look at what we're going through now, like sure, we have the pandemic, but we're also going through this whole movement of resurgence of everyone realizing like, yeah, Australia isn't great. Like like people are dying, blackfellas are dying, blackfellas are dying in custody, blackfellas are dying in their homes, blackfellas are dying in their communities. It's this whole feeling of like we need to do better, but also it's just like we've been surviving and now we have a pandemic on top of it. So it's just this whole different type of stress, different type of survival mode, and I think that's why it's harder to write this manuscript, because it reflects so much on deaths in custody, on deaths, Black death, on how our community mourns as well. And that's why I really wanted a Black editor, but I also wanted someone who was in touch with my Pacifica side too, because I represent that in my novel as well. So it was just so lovely to be like, yes, I have two lovely mentors who represent both my cultural identities. And it's just, it's very lovely. It's very affirming. And I wish I could talk about them forever, but yeah.
Well, this just makes me, I wish I could sit in on a meeting and see that magic sparking between you and Ellen and you and Tusiata. Like that sounds like a beautiful experience for all of you. From both of your points of view, and Malika, you are a young writer yourself, and Ellen, you're still young as well, but you're a little bit further along in your career journey and have a lot of experience, as we said, as a mentor and as a teacher and an editor. What are the other kinds of support that emerging writers really need, and where does mentorship sit alongside what else is out there and the other things that writers who are coming up can kind of draw on as resources for their development?
Those are really good questions. I feel like it has multiple answers and layers to it. This mentorship in general should challenge you, and should challenge how you view your craft and how your craft is basically made or performed. Because for myself, when people ask, what do I write? I'm just like, I write a bit of everything. I'm a storyteller, so when they see that I do like critiques or articles on pop culture, or articles on racism and whiteness, or my short stories and my poetry and my prose and my performances, like there's various layers to my art and my work. So making sure that all these emerging writers are being supported through each craft, through each form of craft is so important, but also challenging their ideas, challenging them to be better, or just thinking outside of the box. Because I feel like throughout my years of doing this work, I feel like I've been challenged a lot from people within the industry who I consider my little family. But this mentorship has also opened my eyes and how I view my work and how I write. Because I've never been given the vocabulary or the explanation of that I don't know. I feel like when there are Black and Pacifica people who listen to my words, it hits different with them rather than those who aren't from our. Like, for white people, like for us, it's like a hug. And most of the time when I perform, I get really emotional because when I get off stage, I always get met with a lot of people crying. And I feel like I first always jump into, oh my gosh, are you okay? Like, did I hurt you? Like, I'm the type of person who doesn't like hurting people. I'm a big softie. But it's also like the reason why they're crying, the reason why they're so emotional is because someone's finally said what they've always wanted to say. And I feel like that's the type of support that we need within our community, within emerging writers, is allowing them to realize that they can say the stuff that we've all been trying to say, and that they should be supported in that way, and that being vulnerable is okay. Like that in itself is so beautiful, and you should be okay with sharing your story. Another thing that should be helpful is just, I feel like for Black writers specifically, it's like you don't have to cater to whiteness. Like you don't have to write for a white audience. You don't have to do nothing for white people. You're Black. A lot of people are going to be angry at that fact, and a lot of people are going to be want to be Black. They're too gammon to be Black. No. But a lot of people are going to want to be you. And I think you just have to know that whiteness is not ours. We don't own it. Whiteness will try to own you. But stand your ground. It's okay. You have a whole lot of people behind you. You have ancestors behind you. And I think that support in itself, knowing these systems, knowing the people around you, networking, and building a little Black community is always important for emerging writers. Because, I mean, you also have people who will support you when things pop up, like racist or racism or harassment pop up because of the work that you do. Because I've dealt with that a lot. Because a lot of people get angry when they're confronted with with our truths. Like, yes, we deal with racism. Yes, we deal with whiteness. And a lot of people get angry with that. So I think supporting young Black fellas and preparing them for the harassment and racism that will come with it as well, which is inevitable because that's how we live our normal lives too, is always good. Yeah.
That's a beautiful answer. Thank you. Ellen, do you have any thoughts or?
The publishing industry needs to be less racist. It's an industry that benefits from our suffering and our exploitation. I want to see like a widespread movement to decolonize various institutions, publishers, writers' festivals across the board, and for there to be more Black editors, publishers, CEOs, positions of power. I want to see resignations. I want to see new appointments. I want to see re-education because it's a widespread issue, and this will benefit our future writers, and this will benefit our new writers, and this will benefit all of the older Black writers that never got published or were rejected, or people forgot about them because they didn't fit into this like little white box, and their works weren't seen as important by people that didn't understand or they were challenged by it. So I really want to see that, and I'm really inspired by like the younger mob, like and particularly like I really see this beautiful kind of, I don't know, I think mentorships, like one-on-one relationships are important, but also like, as Malika said, having like a little family and like little kind of groups and like readings and writers, like just like within people that, you know, belong to like had like things in common, I guess. So it's been great to see like Rayleigh Lancaster and Mindy Gill and people like that come out in Brisbane. Like, I'm like, oh wow, I would have, if I was like, you know, if I had you guys as my friends when I was like 20 or something, I would have like been like so much more confident and everything. I also really think that we need to like break down national borders. As Maleka said, she has a lot in common with her Pacifica mob writers that might not actually, like, some live in Australia, some don't, and so like connect with stuff that's going on that's similar. I also find a lot of similarities in the Asia Pacific region with my writing, and I like when I meet people and I hang out with them, I'm like, why aren't we, there needs to be like an industry thing where our works are like more accessible to each other and we can do more things together. Because the things that we are experiencing as a region, like climate change, is just like, you know, if we like get together, like we can create change, like more than just if we're like individuals. So yeah, I'd like to see, like, there's so much kind of self-congratulatory kind of thing going on in Australia where the same works are being celebrated and the same, where there's like so much more that we could be like, there's so many gaps in our industry and so many like lack of like pathways for writers that are diverse and don't fit within the kind of white middle class kind of demographic.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you. Perhaps on that note, before we wrap up, I'd love to ask you both, the people who are considering submitting to the next chapter or to, you know, any writing competition or opportunity, what advice would you have for them? What would you tell people who are kind of on the fence and not sure whether they should give it a go or not?
So I reckon just go for it, because a lot of good things just come out from it. But also just believe in yourself and know that, like, you're going to go places. If you're thinking about it, just do it. And yeah, I feel like a lot of young people and a lot of emerging writers get very self-conscious, because I remember when I was starting out, I was like, oh, I don't think I'm too dirty for that. Like, I don't feel like I'm good enough. But you are good enough, and I feel like a lot of young people will doubt themselves, so don't doubt. Like, you got your ancestors behind you, you're on your own country, just own it, just go for it, go for gold. Yeah.
Yeah, beautiful. And what about you, Ellen? What would you say to writers who are on the fence or thinking about it?
I couldn't have said it better. Yeah, just do it.
Just go, just submit, press the button.
Yeah, I love it. If you don't do the thing, you won't do the thing. That's it. Beautiful. Well, thank you both so much for joining us for this discussion, and good luck with the rest of your mentorship and working together.
Thank you. Yo.
Our next mentor-mentee pair is Maria Tamarkin and John Bachura. Maria Tamarkin writes books, essays, reviews and pieces for performance and radio. She collaborates with sound and visual artists and has had her work carved into dockside tiles. She is the author of 4 books of ideas. Her 4th and latest book, Axiomatic, won the 2018 Melbourne Prize for Literature and was shortlisted for the National Book Critics Circle Award, the Stella Prize and the Prime Minister's New South Wales and Victorian Premiers Awards. Axiomatic was named a New Yorker Top 10 Book of 2019. Maria is a recipient of the 2020 Wyndham Campbell Prize in the category of non-fiction. She holds a PhD in Cultural History and is a senior lecturer in the Creative Writing program at the University of Melbourne. Last year, Maria mentored Next Chapter recipient John Bachura. John's work is reflective of a life lived between cultures, born in Damascus, raised in Syria, Lebanon and Australia. In 2016, he was awarded the Deborah Cass Prize for his piece Night Falls. In 2017, he wrote No Man's Land, an account of his journey crossing the border into Syria. In 2019, his multi-platform project, Tretinoin, was awarded the Lifted Brow and RMIT Non-Fiction Lab Prize for Experimental Non-Fiction. Maria and John, thank you both so much for joining us today. It's wonderful to have you here, virtually and in real life. And I'd like to ask John, I'd start off with you, asking you to tell us a little bit about the projects that you worked on through the next chapter and why you wanted to work with Maria as your mentor.
If I'm going to be completely honest, do you know those kind of people that walk into a situation and they're like, they win the lottery, but they didn't really deserve it, and they're kind of complete idiots, and you know, they don't know what the fuck they're on about. I felt like that person when I was paired with Maria, because as you know, I wasn't actually familiar with Maria before being paired with her, and once I met with Maria, I was completely in awe of her work and her as a person. And I'm kind of constantly like, you know, second guessing, do I deserve her as a mentor, sort of thing. The kind of, I'm still working with Maria at the moment. Like, I'm kind of clinging on to her for dear life. And it's something that I kind of struggle with in terms of like, there are moments where I feel, am I taking advantage of her amazing generosity and kindness as a person? So that's like a struggle for me, because technically our next chapter, mentorship, is supposed to be over, but I'm just like, no, 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 please don't leave. So I guess going back to Tredenowan, that was probably the most prominent project that we worked on thus far. And sorry, because it was a while back. It's just kind of like trying to remember how I think for me, it's hard to focus on things in general. And, I often wonder whether I've got some like major attention disorder or something. But with Maria, no matter what I was throwing at her, be it a life problem or be it the work or be it kind of any scale of issue, she had a way of kind of bringing in the focus and, I don't know, what am I trying to say here? Maria, what am I trying to say?
Throw it at me, John. Well, maybe we could go back to this idea of mentoring and how for us, John, it never felt like something akin to professional development or career advice. Like it was never, like I don't think we ever used the word career, to talk about what we were doing and what kind of our interactions were sort of built around. And, career in terms of like some kind of idea of advancement towards, greater recognition or greater comfort or, accolades, whatever. Yeah. Like I think we talked about life and work and what it is to be alive and to be, doing certain kind of work in this world rather than sort of building John up to become the next something or other. And I think that's really important. And so when you say, John, that, you are hanging on to me, I'm hanging on to you, like I'm not going to let you go. So this is a kind of a relationship, I think, whatever form it's going to take, like for the rest of our time, for the rest of our lives, because I think of how we approach this idea of mentoring. And to me, like, Ronnie, was it your idea to pair us up? Like hearing from John that, he didn't know sort of my work, like that is, if I may say so, for me personally, a stroke of genius on your part.
Oh, thank you. Well, I think you've kind of talked around what John's work is, but when we talk about like you being the next something else or coming in a tradition of some other writers or some forebears, I think your work sits outside of any obvious traditions, and maybe that's why it's not useful to think in those terms. And Maria, I'm really interested in how you think about John's work and what drew you to wanting to work with him as well. Like, I'm so glad that it worked out, and it makes sense to me because you're both such curious and open-minded people and creative people, but I'm really interested in why you think it has worked so well and what initially drew you to working with John.
I think for me, John is such a brilliant combination of a hell of a lot of things. He is so, he is brilliant, full stop, but he is also so kind of sensitive to kind of commodification and self-commodification, making yourself into a kind of a commodity, whether sort of doing that to yourself or allowing the world to do that to you. And he's so kind of aware of that. And it's, the conversations we've been having through this mentorship, and I'm sure we will continue having them, are like really, really deep conversation about, how to resist that. I think John he's a provocateur. I mean, he courts danger. Like he does work that is kind of dangerous and unsettling and will not necessarily land safely, and he's not interested in safe landings for his work. But at the same time, he's extremely humble. So this idea of a provocateur, or someone who's like ripping apart kind of conventions and modes of communicating with audiences or articulating ideas, as someone who doesn't give a shit, is completely untrue. Like John gives all manner of shits, but at the same time he courts danger and he goes towards like really difficult sort of subjects and difficult territory in this incredibly sort of ethical, endlessly self-scrutinizing way. And he has this wild kind of sort of comedic or comic sort of energy that has been really interesting for me to kind of think about, because this is something I wish I had and I don't have, and I admire that alongside with all other things, and he is a maverick of a certain kind that is kind of so kind of aware how being sort of outside, as you say, Ronnie, outside of kind of conventions, how it can lead to your kind of sense of self swelling, your sense of artistic self-importance becoming kind of huge, and he's utterly sort of against that. So he's kind of a brilliant combination of so many different things, and he breaks down forms that he works with. He breaks down, language or visual media. He breaks down thoughts and ideas. So he never takes anything that is like ready-made units of thought or of kind of formal conventions. So everything is kind of, reassembled and pulled apart and re-examined and then put back together in a really kind of new way. So, I mean, what's not to like? What would be the reason for me not to want to kind of work with John? And I guess just to go back to what I was saying about mentoring, like when I think about mentoring, to me, like in my relationship with John, it's not about telling him anything or, sort of instructing him or, imparting my wisdom, whatever that might be. It is about being in his corner, right? I mean, that's what it is. And it's about kind of being a witness to him. So when John talks about kind of, focus and me being able to maybe mirror something back to him, I think it is about me kind of being or striving to be a witness to what John is grappling with and what he's trying to do in his work and how that bleeds into his life and all the kind of the ethical stuff that he's constantly kind of ruminating about. So I am kind of trying, what I'm trying to do is to hold the space, in a sense for John and to be present and to be a witness to him as he, each thing that he does, it's like it's completely new. He's not going to step into something that already exists and add a little bit here and there. He will step into that space and kind of just completely sort of, rip it apart and then start building it anew. And that to me is just kind of what a privilege for me to be in the corner for an artist like John.
That's beautiful.
I really wish I was a fraction as articulate as Maria to just kind of share my feelings towards Maria. But I think that she raised an important point of ethics. And I feel like one thing that Maria is or does for me as an artist, which is incredibly important, is I honestly think that she's often my kind of moral compass when it comes to work, because oftentimes I feel that I can be blinded by trying to not stick to conventions, or blinded by what I'm trying to do. And so I could be taking a hammer to things when it might require something a lot more delicate. And there's been so many situations where Maria kind of challenges me on the ethics of what I'm doing and the morality of what I'm doing, and you know, who am I doing this for, and am I thinking about the subject matter, or the person that I'm is the subject, or whether it's family. So I think that's been incredibly important for me as an artist and for my work. So thank you, Maria.
I mean, it sounds like the process of you working together is maybe not what people would assume the first thought of what a mentorship looks like would be for writers. Like, it can often, the idea of that might be, well, you sit down and you go through a first draft together, and that's, you know, that it's a very transactional, still reciprocity in there, but it's a imparting of wisdom, as you said, Maria, that it's kind of very focused on what is the work. But it sounds like that what has been most valuable, or one of the things that has been really valuable for the two of you, is having that more fluid interchange, and having, for you, John, having Maria as like a first reader or a first responder to your work in a way that isn't necessarily about saying this is how it can be better, but just helping you to think about what you're trying to do. Does that differ from what you would have anticipated a mentorship would look like before you began this mentorship?
Absolutely. Maria never kind of tells me what to do or what to say or how things should be. She's always challenging me with kind of questions on, you know, perhaps what the work could be. I don't know if that sounds too abstract, but it's hard to explain. I mean, so I actually got Maria's help with the latest project that I was doing for Meme Girls for Emerging Writers Festival, and it was incredibly valuable because when I begun that process, I was just all over the place. I was like, I want to talk about this and that and family and you know, intergenerational trauma and all these sort of things. And also there's surveillance capitalism and just like literally a million things. And she really kind of helped me kind of take a step back and think. She said, well, she didn't tell me, of course, what to do. She was just like, you know, take each of these concepts and really think about them and think about the morality of or the ethics of what you're working on and whether you have the right to kind of do what you're doing to certain subject matters. And that really helped kind of clarify my intent on what I was trying to say for that project. But going back to the whole kind of traditional mentorship, I think honestly, it really goes back to Maria and her as a person, how giving and generous she is. The first meeting we had that memorandum of understanding from the Wheeler Center, and she was like, okay, we have this paper, but I'm not even going to look at it. And she just like throws it away.
I'm not personally offended. That's fine.
She literally threw away the memorandum of understanding. She was like, I'm here for you for as long as you need me, when you need me. And that just like destroyed any kind of apprehension or barrier or anything. And I immediately fell in love with Maria. Like that instant, I was just like, you are fucking amazing. And you are a queen and I will worship you. Which Maria hates me saying, but I keep calling her a queen.
In terms of the other forms of support that are available for emerging writers particularly, and the role that mentorships play, I'm interested in both of your perspectives. For you, John, as an emerging writer, you've had a few mentorships in your career, and Maria, you've worked with many different writers in different ways, and you're also a teacher, and that's a different kind of role. I'm interested in your thoughts on the role of mentorships and how they relate to other opportunities that writers can access for professional development when they're sort of in those early stages of their careers. Maria, do you have any particular thoughts about mentorships and where they fit in, maybe in your own career as well? Like, you're now very established, we would say, but how that, you know, if there are other people that have kind of steered you, and then how you think about your role or your opportunities to do the same for young writers? Or not even young necessarily, emerging writers.
Yeah, because John is not young.
I'm not.
Look, I in terms of different forms of support, I mean, when I think about Next Chapter, because it doesn't, it kind of sort of, I think it gives writers everything they need to some extent, and I'm not trying to do an infomercial here, but I do sincerely believe that what writers need, they need money, they need time. I think they need money above everything else. And of course, saying that at this point in time is particularly kind of heartbreaking because full stop. But, it's impossible to do this kind of work without money. And this idea that, lots of people have critiqued it. I'll say it one more time for the millionth time, this idea that making art is a hobby that people do on the weekends or at 5 o'clock in the morning or after kids are in bed. That idea is pure poison, and it's completely untrue, and it does so much damage to so many people. So if people don't have money, and if how much work is not being done, is just just kind of like smashes bits of me just to think about it. And I think people need time. There is this false economy, I think, around time, particularly, and it's like, we can talk about neoliberalism, whatever, but like, of course, and surveillance capitalism, John's favorite subject matter for now. But like even with the kind of the current moment when people are being repeatedly told that somehow we have more time, right? And this kind of rhetoric about more time, but in fact we have even less time, right? Because we are caring for others and kind of in different and compounded ways. We have our children at home. We have to look for work. So many people who have lost their jobs and don't know what's going to come next. So there is this kind of idea that somehow time is plentiful. It's not. Time is a really kind of a very, very serious resource that so many people do not have. So the idea that you can have money, so you can kind of feel completely sort of you can say to yourself, I am, this is my work. I am earning money. This is my work. I don't need to be doing other things. Of course, it's impossible to survive on that amount of money for the whole year. But that sort of takes care of something really, really profound. And then it buys you time. It literally does buy you time, which is so essential. I mean, to make art, we need time. Like, artists need time. Artists need time to think. They need time to stare at the wall. They need time to talk to millions of different people who will challenge them and make them, change their mind and reconceive and reconceptualize what they're doing. They need time to look at other art to understand how they're joining the conversation, and what's happening in the world. They need time to pay attention to the world. They need time to pay attention to their bodies. Time is just so profoundly important. And I think, the gift of time and money cannot be overestimated. And then, of course, we do need people in our corner, mentors or whatever. So to me, the kind of this trifecta, the three-headed dragon of money, time, and sort of support by way of mentoring, or a person who's a little bit further advanced, if you want to use that language, who's just there for you, who's just simply talking to you, and that to me is kind of completely invaluable. And if I think about my life, it's moments when I was given an opportunity not to work and not to hassle, not to be waking up every morning trying to work out how I'm going to pay rent, when I was given a sense that I did have the time, that it was, that I could spend six months, really deeply thinking about something and trying to work out what I was trying to do. And when I had people who could just hold that space for me and talk to me and notice, what was happening for me, and tell me and speak to me a little bit from the future, because they were a little bit further ahead on that mountain or whatever. Just send me those messages from the future from time to time when I needed them. That's it. And then you need the world to change. Like, you need this rotten world to become, something else. But putting that to the side, that to me is the kind of the magic combination. And I would say that as a mentor, I mean, people help me, and I think perhaps there are moments when I can offer this to John in some small way. I mean, what is it that I know that John doesn't know? The only thing that I know, by virtue of doing this thing for a little bit longer than John, or a decade and a half longer than John, and being around, is I know a couple of things. I know that, nothing is wasted. So when you feel like you've spent, 2 months on something and it just refuses to click and come together and speak to you, I know that that's not wasted. I know that it's that living with doubt as an artist is really integral, and the idea that you want to eradicate doubt is bullshit. You want to learn to live with doubt, and John and I talk a lot about the role of doubt in our respective creative practices. I know that there is no such thing as a little bit of a compromise, and John is a truly, truly uncompromising artist, and I applaud him for that. I know that you pay a price for shortcuts. There are no shortcuts in making good work. So these are the things that I can sort of offer to John simply because I've, my skin is a little bit thicker. I've been around for a little bit longer, and I have just kind of learned that. And sometimes that's all we need to hear. We just need to hear from someone that, no, the 2 months that you spent in this way are not wasted. It all amounts to something. It's all part of the process, and you will end up finding what it is that you need to say next. It will happen. So so what you are doing through Next Chapter, and if it is an infomercial, shoot me. What can I do? I believe everything I'm saying, right? I mean, this is now that's what artists need, and that's what I've ever needed in my life. I didn't need any special doors to open for me. I just needed to be given opportunities to work in a way where I wasn't torn by demands on me and by the forces of the world, where I was just giving a sanctuary of time, money and support. That's all.
It's all in that writer needs a sanctuary of time, money and support.
Yeah, I don't know if there's any point in me trying to add to what Maria said, but I guess just... because I personally experienced the Next Chapter, and I've been lucky enough to win a couple of other kind of writing awards and things like that, and comparing the two, I do think that the Next Chapter is, I don't know of any other kind of initiative that is as holistic, to say a really kind of lame word, but as well, like, it's a very well considered initiative. Because it's not only about the money, which is very important, it's also about mentorship, it's also about all the industry support. It's the fact that the Wheeler Centre is a representative on your behalf within the industry. It's all those aspects which have been incredibly helpful in my personal growth. There was so much that I learned. Specifically, for example, like when we did the publishing workshops, I felt like I'd learnt years of kind of knowledge and experience crammed within a few days. And what kind of emerging writer gets that opportunity? It's incredibly rare and incredibly, I don't know. I feel very fortunate to have gone through it, to be completely honest. Yeah. That's
lovely of you both to say. Thank you. And this is not an infomercial, but if it was, it would be an excellent one. On that note, Maria, you're one of the judges for this year's Next Chapter scheme, for which entries are open at the moment. And I'd love to hear from you after your initial experience with John, which has obviously been very positive, but after going through it in that mentorship role, why were you interested in judging the scheme this year, and what are you hoping to see from the entries that come through?
Look, in terms of, I feel, why did I want to be a judge? Well, if people know who the other judges are this year, just an opportunity to sort of talk about what matters the most to us with Tony Birch and Nam Lee and Alison Whittaker, and they are like, when I hate Australia and I need to think about some people who make me feel okay about this country, these are some of the names that come into my head. So, it's an incredible sort of group of people just to sort of be engaged in that process with. In terms of the kind of work that I am, that I am looking forward to seeing, or I'm looking forward to discovering, as in terms of people applying. I am really interested, I guess, in seeing work that comes up against some kind of a limit, in terms of like a formal limit or a limit within that particular writer's kind of world, or a kind of an ethical limit, whatever that might be, and sort of negotiates that, sort of pushing up against some kind of a boundary. Something that is really high stake as well, but those high stakes could be kind of explosive, or they could be very quietly sort of present and not at all showy or sort of attracting attention to itself. There are many, many different ways in which work, where the stakes are really high, sort of manifests itself on the page or beyond the page. I'm sort of interested in people who kind of challenge me as well as a kind of reader, as as someone who loves words and loves language, and believes that ultimately, for all the kind of endless failures of language, we desperately need it. We need it now. And we need to bring our experiences into language as well. So, but ultimately, I have no idea. Like, I just want to look at the work. Like, if I don't want to come to it with preconceived notions. I want to look at the work and kind of go, what did just happen? And not even know what just happened, and to have to kind of reread and go back and try to articulate for myself what is that particular kind of moment of something truly new or special or unexpected or unsettling in a powerful way. What was that moment, and how was that moment achieved by this particular writer? So I just have no idea. I think it when you see it, and that is a kind of like one of the great joys. You just read something, and then you are just like pulled out of your chair into the screen or into the page by something that's happening there, and you don't, and you did not anticipate it, and it just happens. And I think I'm going to be paying attention to that. But ultimately, I have no idea. And this is part of the kind of specialness of going through that process, because I am a middle-aged woman now, and I went through a period when I didn't like young people or emerging people. I thought they were boring and scared. And now I think, I love them, and not all of them. I love John. There are others. And I really believe that we need people to be coming through who are not, and that's what this next chapter is all about, who would not be welcomed by mainstream publishers, who would not be the usual suspects, who would not be having an easy path through whatever the industry, who are just doing work that is not instantly recognizable and instantly valorized. And I am just proud to be asked to be part of the process of kind of offering hospitality and welcome and space and time for those people who just are not who are not the ones who have an easy, way through the industry. That is a very, very long answer. Please cut it. Challenge your editor to cut it to 3 words. I reckon that's 3 words that you can say everything that I've said.
Absolutely not. I'm so excited for the writers who will be read and judged by you with such generosity. I think that's a beautiful thing for any writer to hear, that a person who is reading their work will bring that kind of openness and generosity to it. So thank you, Maria. Thank you both, John and Maria, so much for joining us tonight. And people should check out John's video piece as part of the Meme Girls event at the Emerging Writers Festival. So get on the website. It's actually
mine. It's for Flat White.
Oh, sorry.
It's not me.
It's Flat White Damascus's piece.
Yes.
Who is John's collaborator.
Exactly.
Yeah. Maria and John, thank you both so much again. Thank you so much for joining us tonight for Iconic Duos with the Next Chapter Writers and Mentors. Remember, entries for the Next Chapter are now open until the 10th of August. You can visit thenextchapter.wheelercentre.com to find out how to apply. Good night.
Visit wheelercentre.com for the best in books, writing and ideas from Melbourne, Australia and the world.